Improvements to the planning system were a key part of the built environment reform programme, and these changes will help to ensure that we have a modern planning system, one that streamlines where appropriate while still providing the necessary protections and safeguards. Mr. President, I to move that the Town and Country Planning Amendment Bill 2024 do now pass.
Call Mrs. Kelsey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second.
Wish to comment? No. Therefore, I put it to you that the Town and Country Planning Amendment Bill 2024 do pass for the final stage. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Town and Country Planning Amendment Bill 2024 do pass. That, members, concludes the business of Legislative Council this morning. Council will now stand adjourned until Tynwald next Tuesday at 10 a.m.
Was the Southern Pool actually consulted as part of this decision-making process? The facility is struggling at the moment and it will lose customers, but also the long-term benefits offered from those young customers returning time after time. Does the Minister and Department actually recognise the challenge and the impact of what they've done with regard to this area? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I am aware of challenges faced by the Southern Pool. And in 2024-25, the Southern Pool Board received a subvention of £455,704 from the Department. If provision remained at the Southern Pool, it would actually cost the Department an additional £4,685 based on current cost, compared to the lessons being facilitated at the NSC. Regional pool managers were involved in discussions around the changes. Regional pools were informed of the changes to the programme ahead of them being announced, and ultimately it's an operational decision for the department. And as a department, we do have to be fiscally responsible and operate in all areas within current budgetary constraints. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Glover.
Good reminder, Order. Isn't this an example, though, of the Department thinking in a very solo fashion rather than the overall public service? And what consultation took place with Ballasalla Primary School?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wouldn't say it's a silo thinking. The Department... sorry? Solo, oh right. It's the thing about the swimming lessons is that this is an improved swimming provision for the children of Ballasalla schools. The reason we had a review of the swimming provision was because of the changing numbers across the primary schools. There's been overall a big reduction in numbers in primary schools, but actually in Ballasalla the numbers have gone up. This is simply a way of the department operating more efficiently, but the benefits are that actually the swimming provision for the students of Ballasalla Primary School will be an improvement. The new timetable will reduce the required number of bus journeys to facilitate lessons for Ballasalla, and in fact the lessons that they will have an additional teacher provided within Ballasalla. There'll be more time in the swimming pool and less time missing from school. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister's just openly admitted that the budget for the Southern Swimming Pool has increased since previous year, but she's also said that it's a saving of £4,685. Can the Minister advise what the costs are for transporting the students into the NSC and the costs for additional staff which will be needed to transport those students?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't agree I've openly admitted anything. I'm telling you the reason for doing a review and the cost savings that there will be to the department by facilitating swimming provision for Ballasalla students in the National Sports Centre. The department is simply being fiscally responsible, operating in all areas within budgetary constraints. In terms of the question of how much this is saving, looking wider than Ballasalla School, the changes to the swimming programme as a whole will result in approximately 1,700 fewer bus journeys. That results not only in a reduction to the department's emissions, but also reduces the amount of time that children spend travelling to and from the swimming pool for their lessons. The reduction in time gained from children getting changed for swimming sessions, ultimately means more swimming time and increased time in the school environment. Whilst the decision has been made giving pupils the best possible swimming provision in mind, the changes to the bus schedule requirements will ultimately realise savings of approximately £80,000 to the department. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to know more about these cost savings because there seems to be several question marks over the information that the Minister is giving us. Surely the number of bus journeys won't change whether they're going to Ballasalla, the NSC or some other pools. So that's a fixed figure. In terms of the staffing, the Minister talks about us employing staff at the NSC to do these lessons. That's the cost. At the moment, in the Sunham pool, they're making use of helpers and parents to actually support the provision. And just to throw in on top of that, if you check with Google, the return journey to Douglas is 24.4 kilometres compared with 10.8 kilometres. And surely there's a great cost of bringing a bus so much further and spending so much more time on the road. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr Triply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reasons for the benefit, particularly to Ballasalla School, is that there's been a reduction of approximately 500 pupils at Key Stage 2, and in Ballasalla, well, rather across the southern schools, there's been a reduction of 90 pupils. However, for Ballasalla, year 3 and 4 will go to the NSC on one bus. A little later the same day, years 5 and 6 go to the NSC on one bus. Previously, each year group would have had to attend the southern pool separately, resulting in more bus journeys. And in terms of, I think the Honourable Member asked about the staffing at the NSC. There isn't any overstaffing at the NSC. Lessons will be covered by existing staff. Lessons are delivered by the existing swimming teachers who will spend 90 minutes per week delivering lessons at the NSC rather than 180 minutes at the southern swimming pool, facilitating Ballasalla School swimming lessons in half of the teaching time at the NSC compared to the southern pool allows the department to maximise the use of its swimming teachers. As such, pupils will benefit from an extra teacher at no additional cost to support those pupils unlikely to achieve the green standard. There's been an increase in the number of pupils in Ballasalla Primary School. This results in an increase in the number of bus journeys required, pool space needed, and extra swimming teacher resource. And as I said, if the provision remained at the southern pool, it would cost the department an additional £4,685 based on the current cost compared to lessons being facilitated at the National Sports Centre. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr Wannenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite all the questions we've heard this morning, would the Minister agree that perhaps the most important thing is that we are giving the children the ability to swim? And that is an important life lesson, and she's to be commended for that. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I would completely agree with that. That is the purpose of facilitating the best possible provision of swimming lessons for all primary school students in Key Stage 2.
Question, Mr Glover.
Guru, my Lord, we'll try again after another non-answer from a minister. What consultation took place with Ballasalla Primary School?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not aware of the amount of interaction that there would have been with the school, but I'm sure that officers will have fully informed and spoken with the students. So with the teachers, rather. Officers worked closely with head teachers, the school swimming teachers, as well as consulting colleagues at Busfannon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Back in January 2024, there was a financial plan carried out for the Southern Swimming Pool, and the actual statement at that time was that the Department of Infrastructure, it says, but it's probably education, stated that the Southern Swimming Pool was running at a £220,000 deficit. That was challenged by the pool board, saying that they could operate within the budget that they had. And the Minister confirmed, therefore, that she's given them additional money, but she's taken the money away for the swimming pool lessons. What analysis has she done to assure the sustainability of the Southern Swimming Pool is going forward? Because that was certainly a huge challenge in this honourable place last year, and from what I'm hearing is she's actually taking funding away from the Southern Swimming Pool.
Mr Speaker, I think that's out of scope. This is a question about why Ballasalla pupils are going to the National Sports Centre for swimming lessons, and I think I've answered that. Thank you.
Question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the Minister's actually missing a key point here in terms of those students actually leaving the local area, and so the local pool is going to be affected, not only in terms of the immediate loss of customers, but also that repeat loss of customers. Many of those children who were going to swimming lessons would have gone out at the weekends and in the evenings to actually do additional swims. So I think that's a key point. The Minister was also eager to support swimming lessons, which is good, but is she equally supportive of the regional swimming pools? And my final element is, in terms of costs, she's made great play of the cost of buses. But surely, as I made out previously, if the children are going to be bused from Ballasalla to Douglas or Ballasalla to Castletown, they're going to require the same number of buses. But the big difference is, when they're going to go to Douglas, they're going to go a significant distance further, of twice the amount. Thank you, Mr Speaker. So,
Minister to reply.
I'll try and reply to the various points. This review and the department's provision is looking at the optimal way to deliver the swimming lesson provision to the students within Ballasalla School. The new timetable, as I've said, reduces the required numbers of bus journeys to facilitate lessons for Ballasalla at the NSC by 72 over the course of the school year. The difference in the journey time is minimal, but the NSC is more efficient both environmentally and financially for the 8 journeys the 4 journeys rather to the NSC rather than the 8 journeys required to Southern Pool, because 2-year groups at a time travel and are able to be accommodated at the NSC. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
To question 3, call on the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chair of the Housing and Communities Board why the Housing and Communities Bill has been removed from the legislative programme.
On the Chair of the Housing and Communities Board to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Council of Ministers took the decision to focus the work of departments on legislation that can be enacted between now and the end of this administration. Council agreed to remove the Housing and Communities Bill as it was unlikely to be progressed in time. Mr Speaker, the Housing and Communities Board is reviewing its action plan to ensure a laser focus on the construction of more homes and enabling home ownership in line with the ambitions set out on in the policy response to the objective assessment of housing need. The Board still intends to progress a number of more discrete legislative reforms between now and the next election. I will be in a position to update members on these shortly.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and to the Chair. Obviously, the Chair might have forgotten then that his love message to me on Valentine's Day 2023 was to ask the same question, was to get asked by him the same question. It is with a certain amount of dread as to how long it would take to get an answer, but I beg to ask the Chair of the Housing and Communities Board why the Housing and Communities Bill has been scheduled for Phase 5 of the Island Plan legislative programme, and then I had a telling off that there were really important pieces of legislation that needed to be done immediately. What's changed? Why is the Chair now spinning this line, whereas on Valentine's Day, February 2023, he didn't have the same view?
Mr Minister, reply.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I do remember it very well. In fact, I have it here in front of me. I'm not spinning any line, Mr Speaker. In fact, my point that I made on Valentine's Day 2023 actually stands. I was questioning the Honourable Member about why the legislation was backloaded at the end of the administration and was unlikely as a result to be able to progress because there was 20 bills down for that one parliamentary year. That is what has come to pass. We have got to the end, towards the end of the administration, and in fact, if you actually look at the plan, it's now 25 bills that would have been scheduled for the forthcoming year, which is just not feasible. What the Housing Communities Board has done as a result is take a practical view and actually said, well, what do we want to achieve? And what we want to achieve, Mr. Speaker, is getting more people in homes. That is what this is about at the end of the day. So we've looked at, is there other ways we can do that? That doesn't mean that we don't longer term need to consolidate this legislation. I'm still very firmly of the view that we do. But is it something that is now feasible to be done in this administration? No, it's not, Mr. Speaker. But the key point and the key focus of the Housing Communities Board is to get people into homes, and we believe we can do that with the existing legislative framework and with some minor tweaks that, like I say, I'll shortly be in a position to inform members about.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. So can the Chair of the Housing Communities Board confirm then that the legislation that dates back to the 1950s, and in fact the Rent Control Act back to the 1940s, is inappropriate for the Isle of Man in the 21st century? And so, you know, when the delegated member for housing in the Department of Infrastructure writes to local authorities in terms of the 1955 Housing Act, which even talks about not living wages, not minimum wages, but fair wages, that we're actually in a ridiculous position. And should he have done more in the Housing Communities Board to make sure we identify the key failings in primary legislation that needed to be addressed back on Valentine's Day 2023 and still need to be addressed now?
I don't expect the Minister to be able to comment on correspondence from the Department of Infrastructure. But
Well, Mr. Speaker, on Valentine's Day 2023, the reason I was the one asking the question was with the Honourable Member speaking, who was actually the Chair of the Housing Communities Board, with the ability to be able to progress some of this stuff. I actually took over the role, I think it was either late October or early November 2023, that same year. In relation to the 1955 Act, my view is on public record, Mr. Speaker, that we do need a consolidation of the Housing Acts. But are there powers within that Act that can be utilised? Yes, there are. One of those powers being what the Honourable Member for Ramsey, Mr. Hooper, in his role within DOI has done, which is writing to all authorities asking what their forthcoming plans are, a power that I believe hasn't been used for a long time. But as much as the 1955 Act does need updating, and I've already said in my original answer, I still believe longer term there needs to be consolidation. It is also important to remember that, to put it in these terms, for those of us of a certain vintage who remember Only Fools and Horses, the Act is a bit like Trigger's broom. Although it's labelled 1955, it has actually been updated at least 133 times since then, with various pieces. So it's got pretty much a new handle and a new head attached, but it most definitely does actually need to be consolidated. I fully agree with that.
Thank you, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Minister for confirming that the legislation is going to get through, and the most important thing for him is that we'll have people in homes before the end of this administration. Can he say how many?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The pipeline is actually published. We did a presentation to members showing the outstanding pipeline, and that was circulated.
How many?
Supplementary question, Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that Council Ministers has got a laser focus. I'm not exactly sure what on, but I'm glad they've got a laser focus on this now. Would the Minister agree with me that the Principal Housing Act 1955 dates back to the decade of slum clearances and other matters which are thankfully no longer as relevant? Would the Chair further agree with me that landlord and tenancy legislation is basically of a similar era, and so therefore modern housing legislation is needed? And most importantly, would the Chair agree with me that in actual fact the Housing and Communities Board didn't come up with the idea of the Housing and Communities Bill? It came up with the then Chair had three very specific pieces of legislation that which the Legislation Committee merged into this amorphous, never described Housing and Communities Bill, and the laser focus was lost right at the beginning when decisions were made in Council of Ministers.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think in part the Honourable Member's just answered his own question, because he just described it as the never described Housing and Communities Bill. And I can certainly say when I took over as chair of the Housing Communities Board, that is one of the things that I found. As I have said, the important thing is to ensure that we have the correct legislation in place to ensure that we can get people into homes and build homes. The Honourable Member for Onken asked how many in the pipeline. Well, the objective assessment of housing need requires us to be building roughly 100 homes a year in that regard of affordable homes. And the pipeline as it stands has been published and circulated to members, which would actually meet that in the first couple of years if we deliver the pipeline. In terms of the Honourable Member referring to the wider piece of legislation, while yes, there are some things that need updating because it is a legislative piece of its time, there were also powers contained within the 1955 Act that are still very relevant. It wouldn't have been a case, even with the Housing Communities Bill, of just ditching the entire legislation and starting afresh. Part of it would have been consolidating the legislation, yes, updating it, but utilising and making clear the powers that we already have. And some of those powers are actually quite wide-ranging and quite relevant. So for me, the laser focus is to ensure that people are able to get access to their own home, that we actually build more homes, and that is what we will look to drive forward by the end of this administration, because I personally believe that's what matters to people out there.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the Minister for confirming that the ORAN indicates 100 plus per year, and that's what should be in the pipeline. So that would be 150 homes before the end of this administration. Can the Minister confirm, is that homes in planning, or is that homes that people can walk through a front door of affordable homes on the island? What is the tenure of those homes that he's expecting to come forward of 150, laser focused before the end of this administration?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thought personally the OHAM was quite clear. It's actually it's about delivery of homes, so actual homes delivered, not just those that are drawn on a piece of paper.
Question 4, calling the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chief Minister what corporate human resource strategies, policies and procedures are in place across government, and who is responsible for the oversight and review of their application and their continual development.
I want the Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are a number of corporate human resource strategies, policies and procedures in place which apply across the public service. These are available on the Office of Human Resources website and include such topics as fairness at work, equality, management of sickness, whistleblowing, recruitment and people strategy. The Public Services Commission, as directed by the Council of Ministers in accordance with Public Services Commission Act 2015, provides oversight of the continued development and implementation of the Public Service People Strategy and the development and review of corporate HR policies and procedures. Ultimately, of course, the Chief Executive Officer and all senior leaders across government have responsibility for the effective delivery of human resource strategies and policy.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. So it is still, there are many corporate HR policies, procedures and strategies in place. I'm glad the Chief Minister has confirmed that. The one that was closest to the general election I can find is a special leave policy in September 2021. Can the Chief Minister just reconfirm for absolute clarity then that nothing's changed and the Public Services Commission still is under the instruction from the Council of Ministers in respect of oversight, continual development of the cross-government policies for HR?
Minister to reply.
Yes, Mr Speaker, I can confirm that the Public Services Commission has that responsibility to oversee the work of the Office of Human Resources and its policies.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder if the Chief Minister could confirm that all government policies apply to all government departments, government arm's length organisations, and that they all adhere to the same government policies.
Mr Speaker, I mean, clearly, I'm sure there's a catch to that question, but government policies are clearly set out in various documents, including the Government Code, and that document clearly sets out the standards expected across government.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. And to help the Chief Minister, you know, obviously there must be a process for cross-government policies to be varied. So, for instance, the special leave policy of September 2021 was then modified by Manx Care, which has its own special leave policy, which is not quite the same as government special leave policy. So my next question is, if the PSC does have this very important policy, which it's had since 2018, after a fundamental review about corporate HR policies, does the Chief Minister expect the Public Services Commission to report on its the government's people strategy, and also on the continued development and the review and monitoring of corporate HR policies, processes and strategies?
Chief Minister.
Yes, I think you will find that information contained within the Public Service Commission reports.
Ms Edge, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just looking at the OHR website, there's 6 sets of terms and conditions that the organisation adheres to. So if I was an employee in one of those groups, I would then look at the policies and codes on that website as well. So there was no catch in the last question, but it's clear that those 6 people with those terms and conditions possibly could look at those policies and procedures that are sitting in OHR for that. Could the Chief Minister confirm, because there is a little bit of blurring of the lines with a lot of the arm's length organisations, if he hasn't got the answer today, could he confirm for all employees within our public sector what policies, procedures and guidelines they go to on a website for the OHR?
Chief Minister.
They go to the HR website, Mr Speaker, where they will find the set policies, procedures and guidelines.
Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I just ask the Chief Minister if he would just kindly confirm that the Public Service Commission only has an oversight of around 4,200 employees out of the total government workforce, including arm's length organisations such as Manx National, such as Manx Utilities, such as Manx Care, out of the total workforce of around 7,300 workers in total.
Chief Minister.
That is correct, Mr Speaker, and of course government is a diverse organisation with many different moving parts, and of course within those moving parts there will of course be different employment contracts.
Final supplementary, Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. Yeah, but that's not what the purpose of the question is. Until September 2021, the Public Services Commission was the employer of public services staff, and it was also responsible for corporate cross-government HR policies and strategies and reviews. I think the Chief Minister will find that the report to him of since 2021 to most recent one doesn't include commentary on an overview and of scrutiny and continual development of the corporate HR policies. Will the Chief Minister undertake to review why that's not, and whether or not the Public Services Commission fell down and was actually in breach of its Council instruction and direction in those years? Because it is very important that we have that cross-government review of HR strategies, policies and procedures, and if PSC doesn't have to do it, who else needs to do it? We need to identify somebody to do that.
Chief Minister to reply.
So, Mr Speaker, the Public Service Commission annual reports are clearly visible for everybody to see. They clearly set out to identify the role of Public Services Commission and report on that role, as well as identify changes that have been made and improvements that have been made. Honourable members, I expect another report to come through imminently. I would suggest that if honourable members think the PSC's reports could be improved, then they write to the chairman of the PSC, identifying where they think those improvements could be made, if they carry credibility and weight, then I'm sure the chairman will be happy to listen to that.
Turn to question 5. However, in the absence of Ms Lord Brennan, this will be not asked today. We turn to question 6. Call on the Honourable Member for Arbroath-Castle-Hammerley, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Treasury Minister what factors caused the Manxman arrival in Douglas on the 1st of March 2025 to be delayed, and how any related issues will be resolved ahead of Easter. Thank you.
On the Treasury Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for his question. Both the Manxman and Ben McCree operated a draft of around 5.2 metres. The company's safety procedures state that vessels must have at least 1 metre of clearance beneath them when manoeuvring in Douglas Port. Based on the chart information available at the time, the predicted tide and air pressure on Saturday, the 1st of March, indicated a safe margin of operations. As a result, the Manxman's master was confident proceeding with the manoeuvre. Unfortunately, as now is well documented, the vessel came to rest on a patch of mud or silt within the harbour and could not proceed further to the berth until the tide rose sufficiently. Since the incident, the Isle of Man Steam Packing Company has received an updated chart showing water depths as low as 4.7 metres within the harbour area of operations. As a result, temporary schedules have been introduced to ensure the safety of passengers, crew and the vessels. The temporary schedules will have to continue until such time as the harbour can be dredged and an updated sounding chart provided, which the DOI Harbours Division are dealing with, and as honourable members will be aware, the required dredging has already commenced this week. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given the nature of the incident, have the Marine Accident Investigation Branch been informed of the situation? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Treasury Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd like to reassure the honourable member that obviously with instances like this, which are very unusual, the registry have been informed as to the nature of it and full investigation will take place. There was a similar incident back in March 2021 with the Ben McCree when she got stuck on mud or silt during manoeuvring, had to wait for the tide to rise. Obviously, I'm very sorry for those passengers that were affected by this delay in the berthing, but I'm also very grateful to the staff at the DOI for being so quick in terms of their response and securing the necessary facilities for sufficient dredging to maintain operations going into the Easter period, which the honourable member is concerned about.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that update. In terms of checking the information, have any checks been done on that? The answer that the Minister gave us in terms of the readings were quite clear, but has any assessment been done just in terms of whether those readings were correct? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister Triply.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, the readings obviously weren't correct because the vessel grounded. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yeah, just to clarify that, so in terms of the meter requirement, the Minister did suggest that the readings did suggest there was a meter of safety there, but in reality that didn't happen because of the material. So has any checks been done on that? And with regard to the incident, are DOI accepting responsibility, and has any compensation been offered to make up for the situation? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister Triply.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. So in response to the first question, as I said, there is work underway in terms of dredging, and there will be further analysis of the actual depth for manoeuvring large vessels in the harbour going forward. In terms of his second question regarding the inconvenience caused to passengers, again, I've apologised for that. The report that the vessel ran aground was at 17:55. Obviously then the Manxman needed to be refloated and was alongside the berth at 19:40. So that is 1 hour 45 minutes of delays, and I do apologise for that. The Steam Packing Company are working quite closely with the DOI to rectify the situation through the dredging, which, as I said, is taking place as we speak, and that will allow the routine times for the Manxman and other vessels to come in and out of the harbour as planned. In terms of compensation to the Steam Packing Company, I don't think that is needed at the moment. I think what we need to do is to get on, rectify this problem, and make sure that it doesn't interfere with any of the schedules going forward. Thank you.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. Just to advise, I do have a written question down to clarify this further with more thought, but can the Minister confirm that it sounded like the Department of Infrastructure Minister said on media that the Department of Infrastructure has known about this mud bank since 2024. So the obvious question is, why didn't they do something about it beforehand? And has Treasury just announced that it's decided to turn a blind eye to its arm's length organisation, making a claim against the Department of Infrastructure for not doing something about that they knew about 12 months previously?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I think I will remember for the point he's made. I think it's quite apparent that there have been exceptional circumstances over the last couple of years in terms of siltation in the harbour due to a number of storms, due to a number of heavy rainfalls, which have then interfered with the functioning of that harbour on the one occasion of the grounding of a vessel. I think it's absolutely right that the DRI have responded to that, and I'm very grateful to them of the prompt way they've responded to this, to dredge. And I certainly, from the steam packet companies' point of view, they've been the DRI have been very proactive doing that. I'm not saying that there may not be conversations in terms of any compensation or rectifications. I just think at the moment, for the Manx public, the most important thing is to get on with the dredging, get the harbour back to full use, and get the schedules back to normal. Thank you.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's a question in a similar vein, really. So, was the shareholder aware of the DOI mud bank back a year ago? Was the shareholder aware of that? Was the steam packet aware of that? And also, for the Manx public, because it is them that need to know they're safe and they're operating safely, if there's been a derogation of duty by the DOI to leave it for a year, and also for people to then be held on a boat for a period of time, and the impact to the steam packet and its services, what will the shareholder do with regards to that? Because it's a safety issue, and I'm sure the Marine Accident Investigation will come up with this, but there's clearly been a derogation of duty of the DOI for over a year to actually ensure that the harbour's dredged, no matter what storms we have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to answer that question, as I said, with the captain of Manxman on that day, with the maps available to him at the time, it was safe to proceed. Since then, there has been an issue that they were using the maps from 2023 rather than the more up-to-date maps, and we are having an investigation in terms of that. In terms of passenger safety, the people on the Manxman were not put at risk at any time. This was a grounding of the vessel that ran aground, and as I said, the main thing now is to make sure that the dredging is undertaken, make sure that there's accurate measurements, and those are communicated to all the people who use the harbour. Thank you.
Supplementary, Dr Hayward.
Thank you. I wonder if the Treasury Minister would agree with me that the harbour seabed is actually very dynamic in nature. Not only is there the rainfall that he's referred to that comes down the river carrying sediment, but actually the movement of vessels around the harbour can cause deposition in various places. And actually, it's likely that this bank wouldn't have built up if the Manannan had been in play, which of course it's not across winter, because as that vessel moves, it tends to dislodge materials around harbours. And so therefore, what we're dealing with is a bit of a dynamic situation, and the department has moved quickly to respond to the current problem.
Further supplementary, Ms Edge?
Sorry, can I answer that?
Oh yes, you may as well. It's hard to tell some of the answers from the questions these days.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't want to be rude to the honourable member and ignore her question. Heaven forbid I should do that. But I thank her for her intervention and technical information. It is a dynamic harbour. People have been talking about derogations of responsibility. Actually, I think the DOI have acted extremely promptly to rectify the situation, bringing in the dredging. This was not a known problem. Otherwise, the Manxman wouldn't have ended up stranded for 1 hour, 45 minutes on the seabed. But certainly putting this right is absolutely the right thing to do. This does happen from time to time. As I said, it happened to the Ben Macrae back in 2021, and it is one of the hazards of having large vessels in a small harbour at a time of extremely low tides. Thank you.
Ms Edge,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, could the Minister confirm then, in our dynamic harbour, what is the standards expected for dredging? Is it annual? Is it 6 monthly? Is it monthly? Because clearly it's not been happening. So what is the schedule that should have been happening to make sure there was no interruption to service?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, we're going slightly off of the subject into more of a technical aspect of when to dredge a harbour, but I understand that there are regular surveys made, and when the harbour does start to silt up, or when there is a threat to vessels entering or leaving the port, then dredging will take place. Thank you.
Mr Thomas.
No schedule.
Thank you very much. Does the Minister agree with me that we should avoid speculating about whether it's people or or put a legal entity in this place until we've had the full investigation? Secondly, does the Minister agree with me that the Department of Infrastructure might have been under a lot of pressure financially in recent years? So this might have been the sort of thing that was affected by that. And thirdly, can the Minister confirm that this happened close to the Victoria Pier, which is the shallowest part of the harbour, and so conceivably it could be to do with breaking up concrete as well and the like, or what exactly happened? Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. I can absolutely agree with the first 2 points. I'm not sure about the third point. That's a very technical issue. We're talking about silt or mud that's built up over a period of time and is now being dredged. Thank you very much.
Turn to question 7. Call on the Honourable Member for Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care who in our department is responsible for delivering screening programmes for cancers of breast, cervix and bowel, and whether any discussions have taken place about changes to these services.
The Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Honourable Member for her question. I think the Honourable Member probably will know the answer to the first part of her question, in that the Department of Health and Social Care does not deliver screening programmes. The Department mandates the operational delivery of core screening programmes to Manx Care. The Department has mandated that Manx Care follow guidelines issued by Public Health Isle of Man in the delivery of these programmes, and there are currently no changes planned to current screening programmes. Reviewing the current programmes against best available evidence is planned to be undertaken in the next 12 months by Public Health. In regards to discussions, these have taken place. I have been made aware by the screening board that the discussions have taken place in respect of the screening programmes over the last 12 months. But these no papers have actually come to the department of any recommendations, certainly in the time that I have been Minister. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that response. Would the Minister circulate who the screening board are? Because that seems to be a question that's not been able to be answered in the space of time that we've become aware of the mandate. That would be really helpful. And could the Minister confirm what the costs are for delivering the screening programme currently for breast, cervical and bowel?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the screening board is chaired by Public Health, and the details of this board, I can ask certainly the Cabinet Office if they can make that information public about the screening board, including perhaps even the terms of reference, etc. With regards to the costs, so the Honourable Member is asking what are the anticipated savings for changes, but there is no financial evaluation has been done, as no recommendations have been made by Public Health to any changes to these services. So as far as I know, no paper has been submitted to the department on this. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Glover.
Good my Lord. Thank the Minister for the reassurance over cancer screening during this sitting. But can the Minister explain why the Manx Care mandate was issued over a week ago? Charities have been up in arms. News stories have been circulating, and it's taken nearly a week for government to actually respond. Does she find that an acceptable communication?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There was a communications plan which was obviously put in place, and the plan was as to do the interviews yesterday, which I partook in. Obviously, I understand the Honourable Member's point about communication. I have been working with and have spoken to the charities, and my door is always open that if anybody wants to come and speak to me about their concern, I would really encourage people to do that. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Collister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the information this morning. In her opening remarks, she said the Public Health will undertake a review in the next 12 months. Can I ask the Minister if she will if she will have an input into that review process? And can I ask the Minister who will actually have the final say should there be any changes in the future?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I won't be part of the review or the terms around that. I certainly will take an interest. As far as I'm aware, I mean, these questions really can go to the Cabinet Office in terms of what the review, the terms of reference will be about, but I would appreciate if the Honourable Member could direct them to the Cabinet Office. With regards to ultimately who's responsible for the decision, It's actually a very good question. The DHSC remains ultimately responsible for the delivery of its functions and compliance with its very wide duty under Section 1 of the National Health Services Act 2001 for the promotion and provision of a comprehensive health service. And as you know, DHSC in turn mandates Manx Care's functions, and by Section 13 of the Manx Care Act 2021, Manx Care must discharge the mandate functions on behalf of the DHSC. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Hooper, supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's really interesting to hear the Minister say that what's actually going to happen is a review over the next 12 months. Can she point me to the page of the mandate where that's explained? I'm just curious because I don't recall seeing a 12-month review of services anywhere in the mandate. What the mandate actually says is Manx Care are asked to implement any recommendations made by the UK National Screening Committee supported by the Department of Public Health Isle of Man. This includes decreasing the frequency of routine screening for breast and cervical cancer. So if the Minister is announcing that she has no plans to do that, why is it in the mandate? Who put it in the mandate? And why is there no reference in the mandate to the thing that she is now telling us she's actually going to do instead? And will she be reissuing the mandate to correct that quite obvious error?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member is quite right on page 43 of the document. It does state that the part that he read out, but then it does also say the Department has asked Public Health to provide support in forecasting changes to screening programmes in the longer term and modelling the impact of the local population. The mandate does not describe what Public Health are doing to provide the support for forecasting changes, as this is not what the mandate does. Public Health will decide how they provide support, and in this instance we've been advised this is in the form of a review which will be done in the next 12 months. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary, Ms. Edge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister's confirmed that it's actually the DH Public Health Act that the Department is operating under to say what screening services will be made available. What the Minister has also said is that she's not sure what the cost is because that hasn't happened yet. But surely somebody knows what the current costs are because they're delivering the service. If not, that's a really serious issue if we don't know what the financial costs are. I'm assuming from what the Minister said it is Manx Care that are responsible for those costs. So if the Minister could confirm that and circulate it to honourable members, because I appreciate she hasn't got it. But just to continue on what is in the mandate, it says this includes decreasing the frequency of routine screening for breast and cervical cancer. Can the Minister confirm, because they're two services that are very close to every lady's heart in here, but there's another service that doesn't seem to be getting decreased, and that's bowel cancer. That's currently offered at 60 on the Isle of Man, but if we're going to be looking at UK national screening committees, they have introduced that service at the age of 50. So it does appear to me there's been a deliberate point put in the mandate for something that can be decreased. Not for something that can be decreased, but what we've actually done is just put in what can be increased, put more people at risk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So with regards, to the financial cost, just in the first part of the Honourable Member's question, no, I obviously don't have that information with me, but I think the Honourable Member was asking about cost savings, so I can certainly look to asking if the Honourable Member could make it clear what she would require in terms of is it savings or is it an overall cost, and I'm happy for her to ask me that. With regards to, and I do understand the part in the mandate that the Honourable Member is talking about. Bowel cancer, as far as I am aware, and as I said, the terms of reference for this review should be through the screening board. Bowel cancer, as far as I am aware, will be a part of that review, Honourable Member. With regards to the part that she said, why did it include the talk about a reduction in services. So the mandate really could be read in different ways, and depending on your view.
That is the problem.
It is to the effect that, either one, no changes to the frequency of screening without the support of both DHSC and the Public Health, although a less charitable interpretation is to the effect that Manx Care is at liberty to simply implement any changes which are recommended by the UK National Screening Committee, What I would say is that I have made it clear that the intent from the department was the position, definitely from the first instance, and that was our intention. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Glover.
Gurumide Lord, we've got government spin on a highest setting I can get on my washing machine here today. Would the Minister agree that the section that the Minister read out, the former Minister read out, the member for Ramsey Manx Carer, used to implement any recommendations by the UK National Screening Committee, supported by the Department of Public Health Isle of Man. This includes decreasing the frequency of routine screening for breast and cervical cancer. Would the Minister agree that that's extremely poorly written, or is it actually very cleverly written so that they can actually wait a week before they react, see what the reaction is all round, and then duck out saying, no, it doesn't mean that, it means this?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I've made it clear that obviously the intention of the department is that it's supported by the Department of Public Health. It's if that's supported by, it doesn't say the intention is absolutely that we are supporting, and it wouldn't be because no recommendations have actually been made. So I asked the Honourable Member if I do understand why he thinks this has been, but the genuine response to that is the one I've given today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With regard to the delay in the response from the Minister, this is arguably the second example this month of us having to wait for a press release to actually be prepared. Is the Minister concerned about that and how it's raising questions in the wider community about who's actually in charge here? And just perhaps to offer some reassurance, is the Minister able to provide any insight into what role she played in preparing this response? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I presume the Honourable Member is talking about the public health press statement that was issued yesterday morning. I'm not responsible for, requesting in that sense that public health should put out any statements. They don't come under the DHSC remit. This comes under with the Cabinet Office remit. But I will say, Honourable Members, I take your feedback. I am listening, and I will endeavour to respond, and I do hope, I have said to Honourable Members, please come to me if you have concerns. I haven't had any direct concerns from you, and I really would encourage that, and I will endeavour to do better. Thank you, Mr.
Literally no point asking. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I hope the House is pleased to learn that I have actually got questions down for the Cabinet Minister about public health for next week, so we'll be able to continue these questions. Two questions from me today for the Health Minister. The first one is in respect of that legislation again, because it seemed, when I read the mandate, it seemed quite clear to me, given my knowledge of the Manx Care Act and the National Health Service Act, that it is the duty of the Department of Health and Social Care to prevent, diagnose and treat physical and mental illness. Section 1 of the 2001 Act, Section 4 of the Manx Care Act 2021. So therefore, if any changes were not supported by the Department of Health and Social Care, they're not going to happen. And if you had that knowledge, you could see clear that the thing. Would the Minister agree? And secondly, there's a new phenomenon come to Isle of Man politics, which is astroturfing, which is people in here, I suspect, stirring up people outside to misunderstand what something means for political purposes. And does the Minister agree with me? Does the Minister agree with me that this is far too important a matter, screening for breast cancer, screening for the other services, to actually be stirred up as a political issue for political purposes? What we actually need is we need considered debate about such an important matter. It's one thing making sure that local authorities understand that the law is changing. It's completely wrong to stir up a vital part of healthcare so that the public misunderstand for political purposes.
Some honesty from government would be nice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for allowing me to answer that question. The Honourable Member is correct. If the Department doesn't agree with recommendations, that is absolutely the case, and there is a clear duty of the DHSC. In response to the language that he used in terms of stirring up external groups, I would say that, you know, I would have to agree that we do have to be careful. You know, we have a responsibility, and, you know, to quote sort of in the past, you know, the Honourable Member for Mr Hooper himself on this topic, actually back on the 14th of February 2023, said he would strongly encourage people to talk to us rather than speculating about things that then necessitates a rapid response. So I would ask honourable members to listen to the previous honourable minister and heed that. Thank you.
Mr. Collister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I'm deeply, deeply concerned by a minister standing in this House and basically saying that a mandated document can be read in different ways. That is deeply, deeply concerning. Where the most of the attention has come from on this is the fact that that mandate clearly says implement any recommendation made by the UK National Screening Committee. Anyone who Googles this topic clearly shows that the UK is currently screening every 3 years, unlike the Isle of Man that is screening every 2 years. And that is what we would consider is a gold standard. Can I ask the Minister just a direct question? Why didn't this particular paragraph raise any red flags within her department, her personally, her political team and the department, given the amount of public support that we as an island have for cancer charities on the island? This should have been red flagged. It should have been on the Minister's agenda. She let it slip and she should admit that.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I actually said that it could be. I didn't say it has. I can't control how people interpret things. I said it could be.
And that shows the report.
Order. Let's hear the Minister's answer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think what's important, and I do agree with the Honourable Member in the sense that he's asking me, was this a red flag? The intention, and I repeat, the intention wasn't that there were recommendations and we were reviewing that. So it wasn't a red flag. It was that the public health were going to go away, do a review, and they were going to bring these recommendations. It wasn't a decision that had been made at that point. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Now, I'm conscious that I have 3 further supplementaries on this that will take us up to the cap of 12. However, the clock has beaten us on that, and the hour for oral questions is over. Ms. Edge.
Mr Speaker, can I move under standing order that we complete question times in the order paper?
Mr Maltby.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to second that proposal.
Put the question that we complete the questions on the question paper. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The next supplementary then is in the hands of Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. If it would help the Minister, the savings that would be assessed from this, if I remember rightly from Manx Care's SIP back towards the third quarter of last year, around £40,000. That's the amount of money we're talking about here. We're not talking about big bucks. So the question I have for the Minister, though, is more in respect of the language in the mandate. The Minister says no decision has been made, and this isn't a decision that she would support. The problem is this is a conversation that's been ongoing for quite some time, and the reason it's never made it into the mandate before is because the department members and Minister at the time said, no, this is not something I would support. Something has obviously changed, because now it has made it into the mandate. So something somewhere has changed. Why does the mandate say that we will look at reducing the frequency of screening if it's something the department isn't going to support? I appreciate no decision appears to have been made yet, but why are you asking Manx Care to go away and do things? And that's the language in the mandate. Manx Care are asked to implement. So if Manx Care are being asked to do something the department doesn't support, why are you asking them to do it in the first place? Something here does not stack up.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the Honourable Member for passing the information about the CIP, the £40,000. So what I would say is, the Honourable Member as
No, we
I
didn't.
said back in
No, we
February
didn't.
20...
Sorry, apologies, Minister. I couldn't hear your answer because there was
Thank you.
conversations going across the chamber. Please continue.
Back in February 2023, he's asking me what would be the reason why this would be...
Oh, sorry, I'm terribly sorry, Minister. Chief Minister and Mr Hooper are not going to have conversations across the chamber while I'm trying to listen to the Minister's answer to the question.
Apologies, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So in answer to the honourable member's question, why he feels this is in now, in this mandate now, and it wasn't supported by honourable members that were in the department before. I wasn't aware that any decisions had been made. That hasn't been brought to my attention. As I've said, I'll ask the honourable member to refer to my previous answer. I did say that the intention was to make awareness that the support was being given in terms of public health to review a clinically led process which will be followed. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary, Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the Minister really, because she has clarified an awful lot today, and I don't think there's been any scaremongering here. I think it's very clear in the mandate that there will be a look at the UK screening. Can the Minister confirm today, back in 1992, the Isle of Man government, Tynwald, chose to go with gold standard screening of 2 years. It's still that screening programme throughout most of Europe. It's only the UK and I think it's Scotland that possibly are not doing 2 years. Will the Minister commit today, personally, does she agree that the Isle of Man should retain, if it is only a cost of £40,000, can she commit today to say that she'll do everything she can for the people of the Isle of Man to retain the screening services as they are going forward, and that cost savings should be found elsewhere?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So just in relation to the motion that the honourable member refers to, she is correct, but it does actually say that it is a self-referral screening programme. In the detail and the comments and the description, which isn't in the actual detail of the motion, it doesn't say 2 years. And in actual fact, in 2006, it was then changed later on from a self-referral to an automatic screening programme. And that obviously that change happened without it coming to Tynwald or the other place. I thank the honourable member for her passion and her concern for the Isle of Man public. Mr Speaker, I mentioned earlier, back in February 2023 in the other place, I was concerned that the Minister back then was signalling a change ahead of 2 to 3 years for breast cancer. And I asked, could the Minister give me confidence back then? Has he mentioned that? So I asked, has he mentioned that in the UK it's every 3 years? Could he give us, this House and also the Manx public, confidence that this is not signalling us to moving to 3 years and that we will remain at the 2 years? Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Minister then replied, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I cannot make any commitments about changes to services. That is the reality we face. There is definitely a requirement to make sure we are following best practice guidelines at all times. And in an ideal world, we would seek to exceed those in all of our services. I cannot provide the reassurance that has been sought because simply I do not know what is coming down the line. I would agree with the then DHSC Minister. It's difficult to give assurances. We don't know what is coming down the line. And for example, we don't know what high technical detection techniques and devices are on the scientific horizon. Mr Speaker, let me assure you, I will not support any proposed changes to the current breast screening frequency currently. Mr Speaker, Public Health Isle of Man follows the best available clinical scientific advice, determines what is most appropriate and makes the recommendations. And while the Department and Manxcare have worked together to produce a clear plan mandate to deliver safe and high quality services, the intention of this mandate in this specific area was to make aware that public health are responsible for bringing forward recommendations. But that doesn't mean every single proposal will simply be adopted without full discussion. Simply put, Mr Speaker, this is all about doing the right thing for the island of and its people, and I agree with the honourable member in that.
Final supplementary is in the hands of Dr Allinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd just like to thank the Minister for her honesty and candour over the last couple of days. I think it's very regrettable that we've had very much a public debate before we've had a parliamentary debate on the mandate and the operating plan.
Whose fault's that?
As planned for next week. Now, going forward, would she agree with me that the mandate has to be read in combination with the operation plan of Manx Care, which quite clearly on page 14 says Manx Care will continue to follow public health policy in terms of vaccinations and also screening recommendations. And there is no mention there in the operating plan of any reductions in service. Will she also agree with me with the comments of the former Minister for Health and Social Care that any change, and she's already committed that there will be a change, but any change was not seen as a cost-cutting measure, but seen as really acting on clinical evidence in terms of the best way of screening our population, our small island population, for easily identifiable and often treatable diseases. Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member is correct. That's why the two plans were laid together, so that they could work in conjunction with each other, and it does not have any reductions in services by Manx Care in the operational plan. And I also concur.
Right things clearly. Order. Please, Mr. Glover. We've allowed everyone the opportunity. We've had 12 supplementary questions on this. It's really important that we're able to hear the Minister's answers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And honourable member, I will obviously take that feedback back in terms of writing clearly. I do hear you and I do understand. But just in answer to the honourable member, honourable Minister, it has not been seen as a cost-cutting measure. That's impossible, because I haven't seen any plans or any figures that have come on my desk to look at this and to review it in that way. It just hasn't happened. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Going now to question 8. Call the honourable member for Arbroath-Castlemaine, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure whether legislation is being developed to capture issues relating to autonomous vehicles. Thank you.
Call the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member. The Department is aware that the Automated Vehicles Act came into force in the UK last year, and that's being followed by an Automated Vehicles Act implementation programme with the goal of safe deployment of self-driving vehicles on UK roads by 2027. There is a similar piece of legislation on the Department's legislative programme, however, it is not considered a priority at this time.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. What will the legal situation be regarding the arrival on Ireland of autonomous vehicles before the legislation is updated, given in 2027 these could be operating in the adjacent Isle? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Currently, there are no vehicles with type approval to operate in the UK, so it is unlikely that a vehicle can come to the Isle of Man before that type approval has been granted. The Isle of Man is too small a jurisdiction to deal with matters of type approval, and so we would follow UK in such matters.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. In 2018, the Department was considering this option because of the potential to benefit the island in terms of the changes and the associated research. But in the initial answer, the Minister was kind of suggesting it was catch-up time, that this had happened in the UK previously, and we're now looking at it going forward. What's actually been going on in infrastructure with regard to this? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member is correct. In 2017, in fact, we issued a code of practice for testing autonomous vehicles on the island. We believed at that time that we were the ideal test bed with a variety of elevations above sea level and a variety of different roads available to us. That was in response to parties that wanted to come and test vehicles on here, and that subsequently didn't progress. So we haven't changed any more legislation as a consequence of not needing to.
Question 9, calling the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what the cost is of implementing the planned Port St Mary 20 mph speed limit zone, what evidence she has of its likely effectiveness, and whether it has been agreed with local authorities, MHKs and affected school head teachers.
Call the Minister for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. The overall estimated cost for the work in Port St Mary was £15,000, including labour and materials. The department's primary initiative for introducing residential 20 miles an hour speed limits is to realise the wider community-based benefits, including safer and more community-friendly streets and long-term health, environmental and social goals. Casualty reduction is undoubtedly an underlying benefit of these changes, though. Research has indicated that schemes based on these community benefits are most effective and that these benefits directly align with the objectives of our island plan. In February 2023, Tynwald reaffirmed the default speed limit should be 20 miles an hour in residential areas, with priority placed on reviewing areas directly around schools. So consultations to implement the 20 mile an hour speed limit in Portsmouth Mary have received support from both the local MHKs and the commissioners, who have promoted consultation with their individual constituents and stakeholders as well. In addition, the local school governors have repeatedly requested the implementation of 20 mile an hour speed limit over the years. In fact, I know this because I think I first asked about it some 12 years ago now. And the recent move has been welcomed by the current head teacher of School Follamora.
Thomas?
Thank you very much. I know the Minister sees herself as being an evidence-based policy person, but the evidence for this whole of Port St Mary, indeed the whole of the island, seems to be very sketchy from the answer given. And indeed, the Honourable Minister seconded Mr Speaker's motion back in February 2023 to amend Mrs Corlett's motion to introduce a requirement to have evidence for this change and also for positive confirmation that the commissioners and the governors wanted it. Can the Minister confirm what I've just heard then, which is that the governors wanted speed controls around the school, but they were never asked to comment on the whole village? And secondly, there isn't actually any evidence as such in the Isle of Man about the perceived benefits of this scheme, and especially not casualty reduction and the like.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. I think it would be very hard to find evidence around the Isle of Man for something that hasn't yet happened. So we are taking evidence from other places, and I have an entire list of reference materials that I'd be willing to share with honourable members if you'd like to read them. It includes evidence from London, Belgium, other places in Europe as well, about pollution, about accident reduction rates, and we see the evidence from Wales as well, where their serious accident rate has fallen to levels not recorded since records began in 1979 there. So I think that it is entirely possible that that's the likelihood of the impact on the island. As for where these schemes have gone in, we are measuring speed in the aftermath of putting up signs. We're measuring speed, and I know myself because I made the smiley Sid look sad this morning as I came past it. 1 mile an hour.
Thank you very much. So at the very least, can the Minister confirm then that the speed, the average speed at the moment in every street that's had its speed limit changed is known, so we can see whether or not the average speed changes, which is the objective of putting up a speed sign? Secondly, can the Minister confirm that she is aware that Ramsey had a scheme in 2022 and Douglas Promenade has had a scheme since 2023, so there should already be evidence about the impact of those schemes, and I'm surprised the Minister's not offering us that evidence. But this question principally is about definitions, 3 definitions. The first one is there a difference between a 20 mile per hour zone, like we have in Ramsey and on the Douglas Promenade, and just a general 20 mile per hour speed limit area? Secondly, what exactly is a distributor road, which is the thing that appears in the motion in Tynwald, and an arterial route, like the Minister started talking about? I can't find that definition anywhere in the Manx Manual for Roads or the legislation. I might just be missing it. And thirdly, as far as I remember, transition between 40 mile per hour and 20 mile per hour is quite important. And I noticed from the Port St Mary map that 40 goes to 20 in a number of places on entry to the village. So can the Minister confirm whether or not there is a policy on transition zones between 40 and 20?
No. To the extent that that question related to Port St Mary, which is the subject of this question, Minister to reply.
Thank you very much. So to the extent that it relates to Port St Mary, I'm sat here and I was frowning at myself trying to think of where there is any point where we go from a 40 to a 30, because it's 30 as you come along Gansey and onto Beach Road, that moves to 20. It's 30 as you come up Station Road and it moves to 20, and it's 30 as you come down the Howe and move into Plantation Road where it's a 20. And the only point I can think of is the how, where it moves into Glen Chas, which is not strictly Portsmouth Mary, where it does go from being 40 on the main road to being 20. And I've had representations from residents in the how asking when they can have 20 through their village. So that is under consideration at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder if the Minister could confirm, because this has been a topic of Douglas Central and Mrs Corlett's for a significant period of time, could the Minister confirm when the decision was made for Port St Mary to be a 20-mile-an-hour zone?
Minister to reply.
Thank you. It was before my time in joining the department. It was one of the first things that was mentioned to me that work was underway, and Port St Mary, I believe, was used as a test bed for exactly what the time taken to install signage, exactly what the costs were to enable us to use contractors to do some of the work around the other schemes around the island. So I can undertake to find out, but it wasn't my decision. It was a decision taken before I joined.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the Minister provide any details she's had with regard to discussions with the police about enforcement? We've actually got a 20-mile-an-hour zone through the centre of Ballastella, and when DI have checked the data, it's just not been adhered to. So is there actually a risk here that people are actually going to go sign blind, and they're going to be going above 20 miles an hour, there's going to be no enforcement, and they're going to be driving at a greater speed in other areas at a greater risk? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In fact, the Honourable Member will be glad to know that I spent some considerable time discussing this with the one of the sergeants from the constabulary who operates quite a lot down the south of the island, who welcomed all of the changes that we've done. He is right that people do go sign blind. What I need one person to adhere to the limits, because everyone else behind them is going to have to stick to those limits as well. It's called the platoon effect, and it's a nudge effect really in order to direct that. However, what we are doing as these signs are installed is that we are then monitoring the speeds on the roads, and we are committed to going back and addressing if those roads are still proving to have high speeds that are unacceptable for the location.
Mr Thomas.
Thank you very much. So the Minister chose not to answer my question about whether there is data on the speeds on all the 20-mile-per-hour roads in Port St Mary, and chose not to answer the question about what the difference between the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit area in Port St Mary is and the 20-mile-per-hour zone on the promenade and in Ramsey. So perhaps it's another opportunity to answer that. But the next question I have is, when this Port St Mary scheme was introduced, it was first discussed upstairs, most recently discussed at least in February 2023. The Minister, then a backbencher, chose to use the words insane about the scheme, which is more or less, I think, is identical to the scheme that's now. And then she went on Manx Radio and said it was almost criminal that officers were introducing this scheme. And Mr Speaker, and it's not really right because he hasn't got the right to reply, but added that there was a group of bureaucrats who thought they knew better. Would the Minister like to use this as an opportunity to apologise to the officers, because they were very distraught at the time, and they felt as if their professional judgment was being questioned, and I calm them down. And it must be quite tense in the department now, when seemingly politicians overruled that group of bureaucrats who think they know best, who are insane and are almost criminal.
Don't expect the Minister to comment on my words, but Minister.
I would never try and comment on your words, Mr Speaker. I think, when I know what the Honourable Member is referring to, the initial plans that came into Port St Mary had speed cushions, traffic islands, speed tables. It had a new number of repeater signs painted on the road, and it was massively over-engineered for what is one of the prettiest villages on the island. And we objected, as Commissioners we objected, and Mr Speaker as the MHK objected to that as well, and rightfully so. What that caused, what those objections caused, was a review of how this was going to be implemented by the department, which means that what we are now doing is a much lighter touch. We are not doing heavy engineering, we are doing the cheaper option of putting signs in, and we are very, very cognizant of making the appropriate adaptations for the environment that we're in. We know that speed bumps and speed cushions and speed tables are problematic in some of our older towns and villages, and we know that they are also cause problems with buses getting through. So we will not be installing those features, which when the original plans were showed to Port St Mary, they were almost a direct lift from a UK design that was wholly inappropriate. And so I do stand by describing that as insane. It was over-engineered, it was costly, and it was unwarranted.
Question 10, call on the Honourable Member for Oncombe, Ms Edge.
Missed my supplementary.
You have a point, Ms Edge.
Yeah, I had another supplementary that you did indicate. I thought. So,
Catch my
okay.
eye. My apologies.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture what progress has been made with implementing the reforms announced in July 2023 to school minibus services?
Call on the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A working group has been established which includes officers from the following departments: Department of Infrastructure, Bus Vannin, Department of Education, Sport and Culture, and Treasury Financial Shared Services. To support the safe and effective running of minibus services, the working group is developing a revised service level agreement. This agreement will provide further clarity for both parties around bus ownership, driver provision, passenger assistant provision, scheduling, licensing, maintenance and all associated costs. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So there hasn't been much progress on the transfer from education, which was announced in July 2023. When the Minister for Infrastructure was responding, she did comment quite clearly with regards to Manx Care would have a different level of service for patients, etc. Clearly in education there are some children that have medical needs when they're travelling in transportation to and from school. Can the Minister confirm what work she has carried, what work the department has carried out with this regard, and what the cost will be, or what budget will be transferred back to her department if the services becomes under education again?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm not sure, I'd agree with the Minister that it has taken some time to get to this point, but the new service level agreement created as a joint project will aim to ensure clarity, set out clear procedures for monitoring the service provision, ensuring regular communication, problem resolution and establishing a culture of continuous improvement. The costs will be determined as part of the working group and the SLA, and that work is not yet concluded. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the Minister was very clear there with regards to a new service level agreement. I wonder if the Minister could confirm that she would circulate that once that's available. But can the Minister advise what budget costs there are? Sorry, is Mr Collister wanting to say?
No, I was running, sorry, apologies.
Sorry, I just heard.
If you could just get on with asking your question, I will deal with the remainder of the House as I did earlier. So please ask your question.
Difficult to
I know that's why I'm trying
speak
to
when
manage
people are making noises. Anyway, so with regards to the service that the department is currently providing to all of our young people to and from school, to special units, etc., is there an additional cost? Is there a cost in her departmental budget separate from this centralised service?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The service level agreement that is being worked on is an operational matter for the department. The service is continuing to be carried out, but a working group will determine what it looks like in the future. I don't have any more information. I'm awaiting the outcome of the work from the working group that is currently underway. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I don't have cost information with me. Thank you.
Thomas,
thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister have any concerns with the service provided by the Department of Infrastructure, Bus Vannin?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. No, I don't have concerns. DESC are of the opinion that the complicated procedures associated with maintenance, repair, licensing of vehicles is best kept within the expert division of transport services. Similarly, the wide pool of experienced drivers supports reliable service provision. The provision of qualified drivers and the skilled input of scheduling managers provided by Bus Vannin would, I think, support better levels of service reliability. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
On to Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the Minister confirm with regards to the service that she's expecting for all of our young people to and from their education setting, when she expects to be able to tell and inform parents of how that service is going to operate with the new service level agreement? The most important part here is the students and how they're going to get to and from school. And one concerning comment that's just been made is that we've got qualified drivers. Have we not got qualified drivers at the present time?
Mr. Triply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. That was the point I was making, that it's best left within Busvannon to make the provision of this service, because they do have the qualified drivers and maintenance repair licensing of buses generally. The service level agreement is being worked on. We are anticipating, aiming that that will be completed hopefully next month or thereabouts, after which any changes in provision or availability of minibuses and transport will be communicated as necessary. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
To question 11, call the Honourable Member for Arbroath-Castlemaine, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture what support will be made available to students going to university in autumn 2025. Thank you.
On the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Students that meet the current student awards criteria as set out in regulations may be eligible for the following financial support for undergraduate and postgraduate degree courses off-island. Funding may be available for a loan, a fees grant and a maintenance grant. The purpose of the combined loans and fees grant is to contribute to the cost of the university fee, currently £9,250 per year for most undergraduate programmes in the United Kingdom. A loan is available for students. According to the current regulations, students must contribute the first £2,500 of their tuition fees, which can be done through personal funds or through the use of the loan facility. A means-tested fees grant of a maximum of £6,750 may be awarded to students towards the cost of their university tuition, and a means-tested maintenance grant is available to students whose contributor net income does not exceed £70,147 in Oxford, Cambridge or elsewhere, or does not exceed £73,386 in London or any country outside the United Kingdom. The amount of basic maintenance grants are as follows: £8,640 for students studying 30-week courses in London or any country outside the United Kingdom, £8,100 for students studying 25-week courses in Oxford or Cambridge, £8,100 for students studying 30-week courses elsewhere in the UK. For those studying on island full-time at UCM, full tuition fees grant is provided for eligible students by the department for full-time degree courses at UCM. A means-tested grant of £5,400 is also available to students whose contributor net income does not exceed £53,946. For eligible students starting university in September 2025, the department will cover the cost of the increase of £285 in university fees from £9,250 to £9,535. The department has been reviewing the regulations for student awards and is now considering the views and recommendations from the Public Accounts Committee when determining the next steps. As such, the department expects to bring amendments to the regulations in the autumn for students starting university in September 2026. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mrs Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that detailed answer. I think it's removed a lot of uncertainty. With regard to the recommendations on income thresholds, are they being looked at, or are they likely to stay as they are? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We have been looking at the income thresholds, yes.
Into question 12. Call on the Honourable Member for Arbroath-Castlemaine, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chairman of the Managed Utility Authority what assessment has been made of the impact of the proposed wind farm on property values within 1.2 miles radius, and whether options are being considered for those affected. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
On the Chairman of the Managed Utilities Authority to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his question and his continued interest in the fine work of MUA. I know this is a sensitive matter. The board knows this is a sensitive matter. And indeed all of the people in here know this is a sensitive matter. As the Honourable Member is aware, Manx Utilities is following best practice with regard to an environmental impact assessment, and this is defined for us in the absence of our own legislation by the UK's Town and Country Planning Act Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations of 2017, as they are applied in England and Wales. As these regulations constrain a developer from offering financial inducements to overcome a problem, we have not taken this matter up at this time. Our recent consultations have given us more data, and I think it is incumbent on Manx Utilities to share this information with our government colleagues. Manx Utilities cannot by itself establish any new precedent, and would only be able to do so if a policy or relevant legislation was introduced following due process. Thank you.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman. The answer was very, very positive until we got towards the end. And in terms of the final section, it has created possibly new question marks. In terms of finding solutions, where does the Chairman expect the legislation to come from to enable this gap to be filled? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It may bring more questions than answers at the moment, but if the legislation comes, it will come from this House. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Glover.
Good reminder, Lord. I've mentioned this case previously to the Chair, but I am aware of, for example, a retired couple that were trying to move down from up near Erie Stane onto a main road so they could get rid of cars and use the bus services that are provided. They cannot sell now because their property has come down in value. I'm encouraged by what the Chair has said, but will he give more commitment as to when, because he did say they haven't as yet, when he will instigate discussions with government to actually get the ball rolling?
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for this question. The first thing I'm going to reiterate is that Manx Utilities are not responsible for changing energy policy. Questions of energy policy should be addressed to my colleagues in DEFRA. Claims about whether a wind farm has an impact on property values vary, with many studies showing that there is no long-term effect. However, initial concerns often relate to perception rather than actual market behaviour, and this behaviour can often be affected by the positive impact of the project too, such as job creation and infrastructure improvements. Manx Utilities is not responsible for creating new policy in this area, but it is responsible for making sure that government understands the concerns of residents, which we have done and which they are very much alive to. Thank you.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chairman has clearly found himself in a difficult situation here in terms of he recognises there is a gap and there's a challenge in filling that gap, given we've already seen potential legislation being removed from the table and the NUA is pushing this forward at great speed. Given that challenge, is there any possibility that the NUA would work with a member to actually bring a private member's bill that could potentially find a way forward in this area? Is that just something that couldn't be achieved? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and all things are possible. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Glover.
Good reminder, Lord. Appreciate the Chair has talked about surveys, but as he's, I'm sure, aware, surveys can be skewed. The example I gave is a real-life example. Will the Chair undertake to work with the MHKs in the area and indeed the residents in the area to try and improve the situation, because it hasn't improved at the moment?
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and of course I give that commitment here today, and we have done it in the past. We have had surveys put out, we have met with people, residents, and indeed we have invited the two MHKs from that area up to the MUA for discussions, and regrettably that has not been taken up just yet. Just yet, I said. Thank you.
Mr. Morehouse, you have the next question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought it was coming next week, Chairman. But just in terms of the speed at which this is going forward and the problems being faced in the local area, is the chairman able to actually talk to the local people and possibly find a way to overcome this problem before this goes into planning, becomes a planning application and is submitted? Because there is a great deal of uncertainty and concern, and it's affecting people in terms of value of property, not just in terms of people being concerned, but there's negative equity, values are dropping, there's real issues out there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do believe Mr. Morehouse has not yet replied to our invitation by email. Following the submission of our planning application, Manx Utilities will meet with the community again, and I have undertaken that commitment already. This matter was discussed with some local residents when we met with them in their homes. Manx Utilities understands and sympathises with residents who have concerns about this matter, and we hope that we can show the people evidence which suggests that generally housing markets return to normal in the post-construction phase. But again, I recognise it is a sensitive issue. However, as mentioned previously, we do not have the authority to address property values directly, absent of any policy on this matter. Thank you.
Turn to question 13. Call on the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Chair of the Manx Utilities Authority whether Manx Utilities is withdrawing from involvement in telecommunications, and if so, when this was decided and by whom.
Call on the Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his interest in the MUA. Manx Utilities and its predecessor has been involved in the telecoms sector since 2007, when its subsidiary telecoms company called Elan Communications Limited was first incorporated. Since that time, Elan Communications has held quarterly board meetings, and each meeting is minuted and presented to the Manx Utilities Board at their next concurrent meeting. This means that the main board has the opportunity to scrutinise the direction and decisions made by its subsidiary board, Elan. As previously advised, after analysing its future prospects, the Elan Communications Board elected to conduct a managed closure of the business, and by giving its clients ample notice, they ensured that they would have enough time to make alternative arrangements. The Manx Utilities Board have not objected to this strategy. The Elan Communication Board made its decision to close on the 10th of November 2023, and the minutes of the meeting were presented to the main board on 24th of November 2024. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Thomas.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and to the Chair. This sounds like very bad news. So can the Chair confirm then that the Council of Ministers wasn't involved, not even the sponsoring department of Manx Utilities, the Minister of Infrastructure, and also that Tim Wood hasn't been involved in this major policy decision to stop Manx Utilities being involved in wholesale telecommunications market?
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Free market dynamics in action is good news and a thing of beauty, Mr. Thomas. Nobody else has been involved. This was a decision, as I've illustrated in my original answer, made by Elan and agreed by the main board. Nobody else has been involved, and I would dispute Mr. Thomas's analysis of this being a major decision. The market is there for other people to provide the services, and we have seeded the market, and it's good to see it grow. Thank you.
Ms. Edge, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the chair of the MUA confirm, clearly it's a managed closure, what stage are we at? When does he expect Elan Communications to be shut down? Is there no current users of the Elan Communications cable? And how has his board made a decision about national infrastructure when it's not his board's to make?
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The answer the Honourable Member is looking for is August this year. Elan Communications consulted with Cura before announcing its closure. Elan was created to make benefit, to spare fibre optic cables, and has delivered on this objective to help reduce the cost of telecoms services on the island. I would reassure the Honourable Member that the current competitive market appears well able to satisfy the needs of the market, and therefore this decision is not a major decision, as the Honourable Member previously has implied. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much. So we now learn it's the board and it's also the regulator. Presumably the regulator said, can we do this? And the regulator said, yes, you can. but this major policy decision hasn't been to Tynwald and it hasn't been to government even, never mind, and not even the sponsoring department. Can the Chair confirm then that what we have is spare capacity on the fibre optic cable that could last for decades to come and it won't be used? How is that to the advantage of the Isle of Man nation? How's, if even one person pulls out of the provision of telecommunications, how does it make sense for there to be spare capacity on the fibre optic cable which isn't being used by anybody? And secondly, given the introduction of this concept of free market dynamic, given that Manx Utilities doesn't seem to be able to compete with the private sector given the answer that's given, perhaps we should generalise from this and we should leave electricity generation and power generation and all those sorts of things to the private sector as well, rather than the Manx Utilities. Perhaps this might be a transferable lesson that we've got here.
I don't expect the Chairman to respond to the second half of that question. Reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would dispute the analysis by Mr. Thomas that this is a major decision. It is not a major decision. And just because he says it is, doesn't make it so. With the decline of services and cost analysis, it is prudent to cease operations so as to ensure that costs to continue it are not burdened by electricity consumers. And I'm sure that most of this House would agree with that. Thank you.
Mr. Morehouse, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chairman has made reference to costs. Is he able to give us some indication of the cost savings from withdrawing from this area? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman's reply.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask you to repeat that question, please?
Morehouse.
Are you able to give us an indication of the cost savings of withdrawing from this area? Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Approximately £180,000. Thank you.
Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the Chair is aware, obviously, we are a small island. We are reliant on our interconnectivity with the world to do a lot of the things that we do, especially in respect of our digital industries and our finance sector and our e-gaming sector. I had always understood that the provision and the ownership of telecommunications infrastructure by the taxpayer was a national safeguard against the potential failure or disruption of the private market he is so enamoured of. I would have thought then that a decision to exit from that market, to cease providing that strategic backstop, as it were, would have been a national discussion of strategic importance with the Council of Ministers. I find myself in agreement with Mr. Thomas on this, that this possibly could be a significant issue, and just because the Chairman says it isn't, it doesn't make it so. So can the Chairman confirm that there have been discussions with the Council of Ministers about this apparent change in strategic direction for the MUA, and if he could advise what strategic contingencies are in place should the market fail, for whatever reason, should the markets providers fall out of the market and decide they wish to no longer service the island, what is the MUA's plan to make sure we have that strategic backstop and capacity that is so vital to our economic resilience?
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, just because Mr. Hooper says it is, doesn't make it so either.
Usually does.
Oddly.
Elan Comms was a wholesale telecoms service provider and not active in the retail market. The wholesale market appears to be well served by alternate private enterprise, and surely that is what we want. If this was not the case, then the decision to close would have had wider implications. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much. I think this topic is going to run and run because we've got the celebration of the private sector now, and it's going to raise questions about all sorts of public sector monopoly provision. And for the benefit of those in this place and beyond, there are some very detailed written questions about the costs of keeping this spare capacity on the fibre optic cable, which has got strategic national backup provision at least, and perhaps also an opportunity that people can look at. Does the Chair agree with me that quite early on in the economics textbook we get taught that sunk costs are exactly sunk, and if there is 20 or 30 years still left of life inside this fibre optic cable, the private sector should be given a chance to have a go? And if in a year's time, somebody loses out a telecommunication service at retail level, does the Chair actually want to be in the position of saying, we made that decision at the board of Manx Utilities and we're very sorry that you can no longer get that telecommunication service. Cura said it was all right, but we never actually took it to government or to Tynwald.
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We must not risk the integrity of the power interconnector. This cable, which we are all talking about, which has been used by private enterprise, that is an intrinsic part of the interconnector. It must not be compromised by any single entity. All the people who were using this facility have gone elsewhere.
Not true.
But what?
Order. Mr. Thomas.
All but one. I'm sure that the Honourable will give me an opportunity to answer. All but one. And what I would say is that we are not here just for one single entity. We're either here for everyone or we are not. And we are here for everyone. So our cable cannot be used for one entity to get financial gain. That is not correct. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Chairman clarify 2 points? The first one is the cost saving. Is that an annual figure or a one-off figure? And in terms of them being dependent on one customer at the end of the day, was that something that was actually looked at? Did they try and get additional customers, or have they simply got to the end of the road and given up? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman's reply.
No, we are winding it down. We have asked all the customers to see if they could find... Well, look, I'll be honest. The way leaves cost money. When we pass those costs on, they increase from time to time. Sometimes they're too high for those people to bear, so they've gone elsewhere. We have one remaining one, and in the fullness of time, he will leave, hopefully, or she, and the way leaves will be vastly reduced because we will no longer carry that cost, up to the order of £180,000. Now, surely that's going to be a good thing, and that is going to be an annual thing as well, Mr. Morehouse. Thank you.
Ms. Edge, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chair's talked about the integrity of the power interconnector. The power interconnector runs alongside the telecommunications cable. There's two cables running side by side. But I'm very concerned of what I've heard this morning from the Chair of the Board, that it's a managed closure, it's going to be shut down by August. Is that the company is shut down, not the cable? Because he needs to be very clear about that. If it's the cable, will be switched off for good and could it really impact the national infrastructure of the Isle of Man? And can he also advise what services his own organisation are using with that telecommunications cable? What about his own SCADA telecom systems that he uses to actually monitor the usage through the interconnector cable for power supply?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say that there's a lot of questions there. I didn't catch them all.
Happy to repeat.
The company is going to be closing down the company. The command and control we use for the interconnector is within that cable. That cable will still exist for us. When I say us, MUA, community utility. But we are not here for a single entity to get financial gain. That is not right. Thank you.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't expect this question to turn into what it's turned into.
I'm loving it.
I wonder if the Chair could just confirm then that this exiting of the market by Elan, by MU subsidiary, that doesn't represent in any way a weakening of our strategic capacity to support our essential telecoms infrastructure. The reason I ask that question is because the MUA's own website talks about Elan as being further securing the island's telecommunications infrastructure through the use of this cable. That is clearly something that is being withdrawn. In all of his answers, the Chairman has talked exclusively about cost. He's going to save us some money in the short term by closing down the operations of this company. But the thing I'm more concerned about is if this cable is there and is still going to be owned by the taxpayer, owned by MUA, I would imagine they're not going to flog the cable to anybody. It needs to be maintained. There will be a cost in maintaining this cable that is now being left unused? And actually, if that isn't maintained, our strategic capacity disappears. What happens if we need it in future? It doesn't seem that the Chairman has answered any of these questions, and it is raising more and more concerns the more he talks about this being purely on cost measures to save £180,000 a year. Is he putting our national infrastructure at risk?
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I absolutely do not agree with we are putting this at risk. That is not the case. The cable will remain intact, in place, and will be used 24/7 by MUA, for the MUA, for the people, right? The telecoms business, as was, is no longer there. It has been sourced by 6 other cables, privately owned, privately funded, so there's no requirement for us to do it. And because we will no longer be using it for the other customers who have gone elsewhere, those wayleaves costs will come down to the order that I've already said. Now, that we haven't done this just for costs. We are doing it to seed the market. We have seeded the market. We have private enterprises thriving on it. That is a good thing. And saving some money for us ultimately would be a good thing. Thank you.
Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Chairman can just tell me, just so that I'm clear about this, that the cable's not been removed as such. The cable's still there. It was a commercial decision to stop operating it. It could very easily be turned on its head, and if there was a need for it, it could be relit. So surely there's no real problem there, is there, in terms of national security?
Chairman's reply.
No, and perhaps that's been the most sensible statement I've heard today so far. Thank you. The fibre optic...
Your answers are quite good. Order. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fibre optic cable owned by the Manx Cable Company would remain available for further use if there were appropriate market conditions for its use. There are, however, significant fixed costs associated with operating these fibres, as I have indicated, and the market must bear these costs if ever they are to be used in the future. The Honourable Member will no doubt recall from his time as Infrastructure Minister that there are 6 other fibre optic route connections serving the Isle of Man, providing ample solutions to licensed telecom operators for connectivity on and off the island. Thank you.
Mrs. Corlett, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Chairman if he'd agree with me that the real value in ELAN is the competitive threat it provides to the market, not so much the services it provides, and it effectively prevents collusion and reduces prices just by its very existence. And as the Chairman is saying, that, you know, the cable is still there and can be reactivated at any minute. Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the Honourable Member is correct. The cable is there. It's a useful backstop. It will always be there as far as we are operating the interconnector, so we can take comfort in that. Thank you.
Question 14, calling the Honourable Member for Arbroath Assembly, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to ask the Chairman of the Manx Utility Authority what assessment has been carried out in the last 2 years of the road and bridge structures and substructures between the port of entry and the proposed wind farm site. Thank you.
Or on the Chairman of the Manx Utilities Authority to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his question again. The details of the assessments on all aspects of the environmental impact assessment, including the surveys which support the transport of wind turbine components, were published within the original environmental impact assessment scoping report, and these have not changed since the report was published. The surveys cover all aspects where information is not already available from the Highways Division of the Department of Infrastructure. The environmental impact assessment is not yet finalised. The outcomes of the survey will be published within the EIA once the assessment is complete. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman. Just to drill slightly deeper into that, have any boreholes actually been drilled on the proposed route to ascertain the substructure? And if so, will that data be made available before the final report comes out? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman's reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The FAQs confirm a specialist blade lifter will be used, which is designed to distribute the weight evenly, so no single part of the blade or of the road or bridge gets too much pressure. There is no requirement to undertake borehole work where there will be no modification to the roads. All data collected for their transport surveys will be published alongside the completed EIA once it is available. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Chair. That's rather reassuring to a certain degree. But the former DOI Minister, Mr Thomas, actually raised concerns about one of the bridges on the A5 when answering a question. In terms of the structure of that bridge, has any extra additional assessment been carried out to make sure that is safe? Because if that was to cause problems, it would be pretty dramatic. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Load-bearing assessments have been completed for the transport route, which includes all bridges, bends, roads, roundabouts, and no concerns have been raised by our expert analysis. A blade lifter spreads the load it is carrying across its wheels and axles, and this minimises the impact of the road structures which are being utilised. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Chairman. I'm almost reassured. But just one final question is in terms of the port. Even if you've got the balance, given the age of the underlying structure and its basic composition, has any additional research been done there on actually basing our assumptions on previous data and previous assessment? Has any updated information been collected? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A detailed transport study has been undertaken by Wardle Armstrong based on surveys and data provided by the Department of Infrastructure, and this includes load-bearing assessments and swept path analysis of the whole route from port to site, including all structures. The wind turbine size for the design is determined by the largest turbines which can be delivered to the island. The design has been developed around components which can be delivered, and there are no concerns with the weight of these components. For reassurance, the transport experts have no concerns about the port. Again, all data collected for the transport surveys will be published alongside the environmental impact assessment once it is completed. And again, Mr Morehouse is very welcome to visit the MUA and talk to its officers firsthand, and Mr Glover as well, because I'm absolutely convinced they have the best interests of their people at heart, as do we. Thank you.
Completes questions for oral answer this afternoon. We turn then to consideration of clauses, the Statute Law Revision Amendment Bill 2024, and as members will recall, most of those clauses were considered at the previous sitting. We have just two matters left to consider, and first of those is Clause 16, and I call on Mr Ashford to move.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. After a pause of a few weeks, we're back at the clauses stage. The one outstanding clause being Clause 16. The Honourable Member for Ramsey, Mr Hooper, quite rightly raised a very valid question, one that I said myself I would go away and check. After consulting with His Majesty's Learned Attorney General in relation to Clause 16 and the amendments to the Legal Practitioners Registration Act, I can give comfort that the way that it is worded does not mean that any public sector worker will be able to go away and call themselves an advocate. I will draw the House's attention, Mr Speaker, to the appropriate phrase, which is who does not practice or carry on business in any other capacity. So that is a key phrase, because anyone working within the public sector in a different role will be carrying on business in another capacity. So with that, I'm happy now to proceed to move the clause, and therefore I beg to move Clause 16 to stand part of the bill, Mr Speaker.
Mr Pallister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Happy to second.
Put the question that Clause 16 stand part of the bill. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Turning now to new Clause 5, which was Amendment 6 previously. In detail, I call on Mr Johnson to move.
Mr Speaker, I propose the inclusion of the fifth new clause in the bill, which remained to be considered from proceedings on the 11th of February. The new clause inserts into the Statute Law Revision Bill an amendment to the Performers Protection Act 1996. The Act protects intellectual property rights and performances and recordings of performances. IP rights exist to encourage the creation of intellectual property by allowing the creator to control its exploitation to some extent and to benefit financially from such exploitation. The Performers Protection Act 1996 gives performers of musical or theatrical works right to control and to gain from the recording and distribution of those performances, similar to the way in which the Copyright Act 1991 gives creators rights to control their works. It also protects the rights of persons who have exclusive recording contracts with the performers. Intellectual property law is underpinned globally by a number of international treaties, and agreements, many of which apply through the United Kingdom to the Isle of Man. Intellectual property mechanisms such as trademarks and patents are also closely bound up with the UK. It makes sense, therefore, for the island's legislation in this area to closely follow the United Kingdom's. Currently, it is only permissible under the Performance Protection Act to use secondary legislation to amend the Act to comply with changes in international law. The new section at 30AB will allow the Council of Ministers to amend the Act by order as a consequence of changes in either international law or the law of the United Kingdom. This may be used, for example, in cases where the UK has amended its own legislation in order to properly comply with international treaties. Under the existing Section 31 of the Performance Protection Act, which applies Section 176 of the Copyright Act 1981, any such order will require Tynwald approval. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the amendment to the Performance Protection Act 1996 in my name.
Mrs. Court.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to second.
Mr. Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just really wanted to say thank you to both ministers for actually taking the time to look into the concerns I raised during the clauses stage of the bill, and for taking the time to actually just check the issues, make sure it's all working. I just want to say thanks and put it on the record, Mr. Speaker.
Move to reply.
Thank you.
Put the question there, and the Chief Minister would like to resume his seat. He is in the room and therefore eligible to vote on this contentious matter. Put the question that new clause 5 be approved in detail and stand part of the bill. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That concludes consideration of clauses, and I now turn to Mr. Ashford to move suspension of standing orders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the fact that there has been a pause in this bill, and there was only the one clause to be dealt with today, I would beg to move that Standing Order 4.11 brackets 1 be suspended to permit the third reading of the bill to be taken at this sitting. We've had a bigger gap than normal we would between clauses stage and third reading, so I hope the House will be able to support this request today.
Mr. Coulter.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to second.
Put the question that Standing Order 4.11 brackets 1 be suspended to permit the third reading of the bill to be taken at this sitting. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Ashford to move third reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by thanking the House for permitting the third reading to be taken today? I'm very pleased to move the third reading of the Statute Law Revision Bill 2024. The purpose of the bill is to ensure that Acts of Tynwald can continue to be accurate and up to date. To recap very briefly, Mr. Speaker, this bill makes a series of minor amendments and corrections to Acts of Tynwald and repeals obsolete provisions. Additionally, it has provided an opportunity to make a small amendment to 5 separate acts where it has been determined that the Act as passed did not accurately reflect the will of Tynwald. The bill avoids the need for multiple changes to be made to multiple acts of Tynwald, which would take longer to do. This bill has provided the vehicle to make identified changes quickly. Items identified for inclusion in the bill were collated and sent to the Attorney General's chambers, and all departments have been consulted with internally. Honourable members considered 52 clauses in detail in February, and the entire House will be pleased to know it's not my intention to go over them all yet again. Just in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my seconder, Mr. Collister, for seconding as we've gone along, and also for the House's forbearance at clauses stage. It wasn't the most simple of bills to follow at clauses stage with the way that clauses interacted and needed to be grouped. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Statute Law Revision Bill 2024 be read for a third time.
Mr. Coulter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to second.
Put the question that the Statute Law Revision Amendment Bill 2024 be read for the third time. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. And that therefore concludes the business on our order paper this morning, and we stand adjourned until next week in Tynwald Court.